Okie dokie. And we are live. Okay, crack open a fizzy water and let's get to it because it's about to go down. Alrighty. So let's go ahead and start with our Astro-Babble for today. We've got 8 more charts, and these charts have been randomly submitted by you, the audience. Lovely audience. Thank you so much for participating. I am also going simultaneously live on Instagram right now, so if you would like to join me there, you can always join me there at Scorpio Rising Astrology. And everybody submitted their birth date, place, and exact birth time for these charts, which has allowed me to pull up the blueprint of their life, aka their natal chart at the time that they were born, and that's what I'm using for this astrocast. So if you would like to participate, feel free to private message me and send me your birth date, place, and time. Exact time is needed for this process because astrology is a little bit more exact with timing. But then also, if you would like to submit your birth time for these live casts, make sure that you spell out the month as well as the date, especially if you are overseas and you do month first, day second. That tripped me up at the first, learning on the fly with these live astrocasts. But let's go ahead and pull up our very first chart that was submitted, and we will get into our live readings. So we have Chelsea first. Chelsea submitted her chart. She was born at 4:37 p.m. in Orange, and that is that. So let's go ahead and look at what these charts have to say. First and foremost, Chelsea's got ascendant in Gemini, but it is opposing the sun at 14 degrees and Mercury at 14 degrees in Sagittarius in the 7th. This has been a major theme in the live casts when we've gone to charts, is we have planets opposing the ascendant. What does that mean? And when we look at the ascendant in the chart is kind of like the helm of the wheel of a ship. I think I'm saying that right. Not really a big fan of boats, despite being a triple water sign. But the idea of the ascendant being how the chart is steered, it's the commanding force of somebody's chart. And so we've got that Gemini ascendant, but it's being opposed. There are planets that are sitting across the table from it and glaring at it intently with something to say because they're on the opposite side of the argument. And so specifically, her having her sun there and her Mercury there means that the principles of ego and the principles of communication, as well as the mind, which the sun and Mercury represent, both being in Sagittarius, are opposing her personality. So we've got some personality conflicts, with the ego being in that relationship house, the mind being in that relationship house of the 7th, or the descendant, opposing her ascendant, her personality, or the light that graced her at the time of her birth, is another way to think of the ascendant. I love that language. All about the poetic language because my Mercury is in Gemini. Anyway, so when we look at having the sun and Mercury opposing the ascendant, the first thing I would suggest to Chelsea is to not over-identify with relationships. Just because you have somebody in your life does not mean that they need to consume your life. And instead, this should really be a partnership, a meeting of the minds, a meeting of two separate egos, as opposed to merging into one collective force where you get lost in the process. That's not necessarily an ideal way to shape any relationship. And so we really need to make sure that you have clear communication boundaries, clear egoic boundaries, and that ascendant doesn't get too compromised as you move forward. Jupiter is ruling those Mercury and Sun placements. Let's look at where Jupiter is. Jupiter is also in the 12th house in Taurus. We've talked about the 12th house on these casts before. So the 12th house is that house of hidden enemies. Whenever we have a planet there, it is in a hidden part of the chart, but specifically has to deal with things that are not necessarily seen that might be considered malefic, or 12th house also has karmic healing, end of life hospitalization themes as well, especially from a medical astrology standpoint. 12th house planets are very important. So we've got Jupiter and Taurus ruling everything in the seventh. So the seventh house of relationships is being ruled by a planet in the 12th house of hidden enemies, as well as hospitalizations. So the idea that spouses incurring medical trauma or spouses becoming hidden enemies continues to be a part of the chart. So we really need to understand with this secondary signification that Chelsea's spousal connections, the people that she really brings into her innermost circle, might derail her from her life path, and that those need to be taken with a bunch of salt, understand them for what they are, the value that they bring, all of those lovely Sagittarius connections. She might also marry somebody or have a long-term relationship with somebody who's in that medical field, in that hospice care world of the 12th house. But those people are ultimately going to detract from a lot of the life lessons that she needs to learn on her own. We can also see that with the ascendant as well as the Sun-Mercury combo being in a loose sign-based square to her north and south node in Pisces Virgo in the 10th and 4th houses of career and home. So there's a lot of astrological conflict in the mutable signs in Chelsea's chart. Just the idea that being too mutable, too flexible, not necessarily ideal. We need to be a little bit more rigid, but that's where her moon kicks in. She's got the moon in Scorpio, Scorpio, Pluto in Scorpio, as well as Venus in Scorpio, all in the 6th, making her a prime candidate to work with friends, but also specifically to do work in healthcare, to do work in trauma care, to do work with pets as well as animals, because the sixth house in the chart rules our furry friends, in case you weren't aware of that. The reason why I say working with friends is because Mars and Aries in the 11th, the house of friendships, is ruling that 6th house of work. So we find some work friend connections. The people that she actually meets through her work are actually really strong friendships. They're very powerful personalities, potentially involved with the military as well because of that Martial Aries influence. If we wanted to kind of put all that together, actually working on healing relationship trauma with military spouses, that would be an interesting. I always like to give the weirdest, most nuanced description of what these planets could be in a particular chart when I read these charts live through the live streams. So again, that idea of taking that Gemini ascendant ruled by Mercury in the 7th of relationships, pair that with the moon in Scorpio in the 6th being ruled by Mars and Aries in the 11th, and just the idea that healing relationships via work and involvement with friends in the military, that's how we would kind of connect all of that stuff. Money stuff, second house ruled by Cancer, moon in Scorpio in the 6th. Work will provide. That's just kind of how it ends up. But a lot of the career success that Chelsea will experience throughout her lifetime here will be connected to that Jupiter in the 12th, that healing karma energy of the 12th house. Let's see, where else do we want to go with Chelsea's chart? Because the North Node in Pisces is in the 10th, we can really see that her life path mission is actually here to serve other people from a point of power and delve into some of those deeper 12th house themes. So I think that the more she fights that undertow to bring her into those dark places that nobody really likes to deal with, which she's uniquely qualified to deal with because of her Scorpio moon being very co-present with Venus in Scorpio and Pluto in Scorpio in the 6th. I think the more she recognizes her ability to deal with trauma, not just in herself, but also in others, the more she'll succeed and find her soul's alignment. Yep. So that's that. That's Chelsea's chart. Thank you, everybody, for coming on and bringing your charts. I can see my messengers already starting to blow up a little bit. So thank you, thank you, thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you to everybody who's tuning in on Instagram as well. Going live on 2 platforms this morning. You can hit me up, at Scorpio Rising Astrology on Insta. And let's move to our second chart. So we've got Beth. Beth was born at 10 a.m. in Chicago. Let's go ahead and look at Beth's chart. So again, we've got the moon this time opposing the ascendant. So the ascendant at 4 degrees of Sagittarius opposing the moon at 8 degrees rough opposition, not necessarily exact, but opposing the moon in Gemini in the 7th. So again, the over-identification with relationships, that's a theme this morning already and has been on these forecasts for quite some time. One of the things about relationships with Beth is that her moon is making a pretty exact trine from 8 degrees to 10 degrees, her Venus in Libra in the 11th, making that trine to the moon in Gemini at 8 degrees in the 7th. So that's a lovely connection. The idea that spouses often are met through social groups, activism, things that Beth is actually very passionate about, changing the world one communication at a time. And the 7th house, 11th house trine between the moon and Venus, I think is really important, just because even if relationships don't work out, that friendship connection is still there. That Venus, which brings grace and loveliness wherever she touches, making an exact aspect to the moon in Gemini. Although the emotions are a little bit flighty, they are always coming from the best place with the best intentions. In fact, I'd say that the Venus in Gemini, or the Venus in Libra, rather, the Venus in Libra in Beth's 11th house is the most beneficial planet in her charts. That's a really great placement, if I do say so myself. That's excellent, because Venus is in her natural sign of Libra. And that's excellent. Okay, so we've got some other hidden stuff. 12th house themes seem to be coming up already today in the first couple charts that we're seeing. We've got the Sun in Scorpio in the 12th, co-present with Neptune in Scorpio in the 12th and Mars in Scorpio in the 12th. So definitely working in hospitals. We've seen that already before, but the idea that Beth has a lot of her ego, though, those solar qualities that remain hidden. Also, when we see the Sun in the 12th house, it's somebody who is their own worst enemy. This is a theme that I find really, really interesting in astrology, because when we find the ruler of the ascendant, or when we find the Sun, which represents the ego, the self, in that 12th house, which is naturally hidden, which is naturally the place of hidden enemies, we find that somebody is prone to self-sabotage. We find that self-confidence is a major issue, and we really need to rectify that by bringing more solar qualities into the life. That could be something as simple as moving to a warmer climate, taking more time in the sun, working on self-esteem, ingesting warmer foods even, making sure that foods have spice, have solar radiance, are fresh and full of that solar vitality, which is somewhat missing or hidden in Beth's chart. Let's talk about some money stuff. Money stuff is really interesting. She's got Jupiter in Capricorn in the 2nd, which is technically in its detriment, because it's opposing its exaltation in Cancer. However, she's also got Saturn in Capricorn in the 2nd. So all of these Capricorn transits that we've been having over the past year and will continue over the next 9 months will continue to hit Beth in the financial realm. But one of the things that Saturn does in a natal chart is that it ripens over time. So around the first Saturn return is when Beth really started to understand what money was, what wealth was, and how to accrue it. When we see Capricorn and Saturn working together in a chart, it's really that hard knock life turning into prosperity that's reaped over hard work, hard effort, and the long haul. And to have that in the financial house is I think personally something that is really good for Beth, but will ripen over time. With the first Saturn return, money was tough until about 28 to 30. And then when she approaches 60, the idea of that second Saturn return, as that comes forward, that Saturn will get a second boost, and those lessons, those transits will start to make even more sense from a financial perspective. So hang in there, Beth, from a natural standpoint. But what's interesting, even though Jupiter in Capricorn is in detriment, it's still ruling the ascendant. So the idea that money has always been important to Beth, more so than other people, but also the idea of entrepreneurship, of going out on your own, working in a legal field, and specifically using all of that consciousness surrounding wealth, putting that into a powerful place as opposed to letting it continue to dominate the life experience. I think that's a really fun trial that Beth has had to overcome in her life, especially with the MC, the highest point in the chart, in the 10th house, making an exact trine, not exact, but a close enough trine to that Saturn placement. There's a lot of good, solid entrepreneur stuff that's had to ripen over time. As long as we can make sure that the ego doesn't get too suppressed and the relationships don't take over and assault the personality. I think there's a lot of really positive growth that Beth can do, especially in the friendship department and working with financial resources to mold life in the image that she desires, as opposed to kind of playing the victim or letting the personality be conflicted by relationships. Yeah, good stuff. Standing on one's own 2 feet. Hi, everybody. Brandy, thank you for joining. Debbie, thank you for joining. Christine, hey, how's it going? Thank you all for jumping on. We're going live on Facebook and Instagram with more charts. I appreciate you all very much for jumping on. If you'd like more information or would like to schedule a consult or check out classes, go to ScorpioRisingAstrology.com, which is my website. Let's pull up chart number 3 as we continue to move through these 8 that I've had you all submitted. And we've got Brandy's chart. Brandy coming on through. Brandy was born at 12:19 a.m. in Louisville. Let's check out Brandy. So we've got Capricorn ascendant at 3 degrees being ruled by Saturn in Virgo in the 9th at 7 degrees. That's cute. That's cute, Brandy. Very cute. We've also got the moon in Virgo. Love my Virgo placements. In the 9th as well. So let's talk a little bit about the 9th house, because we've got Saturn and the moon here, and Saturn's ruling the ascendant. The idea of always being attracted to the subjects of foreigners, travel, and higher education is a theme in Brandy's life. Because Saturn is here and Saturn is also retrograde, that might put the brakes on travel until she's about 30, but the passion for travel, for higher education, and for learning about foreign culture has always been in Brandy's consciousness, especially because the moon is here. The moon is also waxing towards its fullness in Virgo, because her sun is in Taurus, which is also separating, but still making a trine to the sun. So we've got moon sun stuff here, especially with that being in the 5th house of creativity. Lots of good travel stuff. I'm looking at some other things, and maybe no, not necessarily. I thought the chart was going to go in a specific direction, but it's not going to go in that direction. We have to look at other stuff. We're being drawn into the 4th house because the 4th house has Mars in Aries, a sign that's in its domicile, but it's also conjunct at 23 degrees with Mercury in Aries, and Venus in Aries is co-present in the 4th. That's fun. So we've got potential military influences in the home. We've got Mercury and Aries here. So the idea that constantly being surrounded growing up by very sharp minds, which potentially were mentally aggressive or a little bit too competitive or combatant. In the 4th house, growing up with family. Venus is here, but Venus is also in Aries, not enough to overpower or to counterbalance even a fully formed Mars and Aries transit like that, especially because Venus is going to be opposing Pluto in the 10th house of career. That's a little bit rough. Pluto is in the 10th house of career, also in Libra, opposing Venus in Aries. So let's talk about that. The idea that family didn't set you up to succeed, Brandy, is something that you'll realize is actually of benefit to you, because the way they would have set you up to succeed is actually detrimental to your life's purpose. And that's something that Pluto really teaches us when we look at Pluto being, again, a level 50 planet. I've talked about this almost every live cast, because I think that, first of all, Pluto's on my ascendant, so I can't not talk about Pluto. I'm obligated to invoke the underworld at any given moment. When we talk about Pluto in the chart, it's a spot that really only matures halfway through the life, as opposed to Saturn, which has about 2 runs. We get one good fermentation out of Pluto, and that's when we're about 50. And for you, because there's going to be Venus ruling Pluto, and Venus is in the fourth house of family. Just the idea that even though family really just rubbed you the wrong way, it's not necessarily to your detriment. It's actually something that taught you how not to behave, how not to take that aggressive stance at life, how to not burn bridges, how to not act quickly and impulsively. Those things that you've now started to understand are of detriment to kind of succeeding in the life that you've decided to live and create. Because the sun is being ruled by Venus in the fourth. I think one of the things that came out of your family situation is just the idea of how to be creative and how to pursue your dreams with a sense of steady vigor that you wouldn't have necessarily been exposed to. The encouragement is really the positive side of all that fourth house Aries stuff. Because your family really talked about just go for it, just do it. And because of that, your sun in Taurus in the fifth really got the ego boost that it needed to say, it doesn't really matter what other people think. I'm going to do what I'm going to do because I like to do it. And that's really all that matters in this situation. That's good. We've got Uranus and Scorpio retrograde in the 11th. That's an interesting placement, especially when connected with Mars and Aries in the 4th. Interesting. So Uranus in the 11th, because Uranus is in the house of friendships, we have friends and social groups who are highly unpredictable, potentially in a malefic way, because Uranus is retrograde and also in Scorpio. So we need to watch out for your taste in friends, Brandy. We need to make sure that the people that you surround yourself with in a social circle, there's a certain level of okayness with people shaking you up and being exposed to things that you wouldn't necessarily be exposed to otherwise. But I think if we allow those Uranian themes to invade your life a little bit too completely, it's going to bring back traumatic flashbacks of what happened when you were younger. So with the overly aggressive parental dynamic, that throw caution to the wind experience, we need to also embrace friends who complement your calmer side. You don't always need to be that calm, collected friend for other people. You also deserve to have those people in your life echoing back to you the things that you are always telling everybody else. Let's look at Jupiter in Leo. So Jupiter in Leo is being ruled by the sun in the 5th. We've got an interesting setup for children here, because the sun in the house of children is ruling Jupiter in the house of death, taxes, and estates. We have an issue potentially with children passing prematurely, but we also have lots of good securities when it comes to children maturing in the future and potentially bringing in a lot of finance, wealth, estate, property into the family. I've seen this in a couple other charts where when the 5th house and the 8th house are connected, especially over time and children start to flourish and grow, there is a large potential for that flourishing and growth to help support the native, the person whose chart we're running, as they retire and move into the waning phase of their own life. Children then swoop in to support that process when they've been supported by parents throughout their whole life. The children that have now brought food to the table for the aging parent, that 5th house, 8th house connection really speaks positively toward about children returning, being a good return on investment is a business way to think about it, for Brandy specifically. So that's a positive thing, but again, something that I see happen normally later in life. We've got that North Node in the 9th house when it comes to, again, part of Brandy's mission is really to understand how to travel, how to engage with foreign cultures, how to use higher education as leverage in her life, especially because Mercury is in the 4th house of family ruled by Aries. It wouldn't surprise me. Again, those military influences making you travel from place to place, exposing you to other cultures, then turns into a life path where we create a lot of beautiful connection with people all over the world. And that's part of what I think is super fascinating about your chart, Brandy, is how it all kind of ties in together. Thank you, everybody who's jumping on. I appreciate you. Liz, Beth, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Yeah, the connection's being a little bit weird, but the recording should take it up. Hey, Allie. Hey, Brandy. Yes, this is all good stuff. Thank you all for jumping on. Okay, we are about halfway through, and we are about halfway through. So making good time. Let's go ahead and look at our fourth chart for Corinne. Okay. Corinne was born at 5:50 p.m. in Toronto. Props to all my Canada peeps. Absolutely love you. Oh, goodness, these planets opposing the ascendant. I can't. Okay, so we've got the ascendant at 2 degrees of Pisces, this time making a separating but still opposition to Pluto in Virgo in the 7th. Mercury in Virgo is also here in the 7th in its exaltation, which is lovely. However, it is making still a sign-based opposition to that ascendant. And Jupiter is in Libra, cannot see Mercury to rectify that placement. So again, we've got this idea that relationships will be slightly testy to the personality, and we need to work on remediating those relationships by understanding the difference between focus and going with the flow with Corinne. So your tendency, Corinne, is actually to be the peacekeeper, to be the person who really assuages, is a good word, somebody who steps in and is able to be the voice of reason in complicated situations, especially because your ascendant is ruled by Jupiter in Libra in the 8th. So there's a lot of really noble qualities to your personality. Unfortunately, with relationships, you tend to be attracted to people who have the opposite mindset, people who are slightly pessimistic, always thinking that the sky is falling, preparing for the worst. And because of that, it really kind of messes with your flow. It's a good partnership because the person who can fix the issues and the person who identifies the issues make a good team. Yeah. But just understand that the person that you choose to be a partner with will naturally have that mindset ingrained. And it's not something that you need to change. It's not something that they need to change. But instead, it's something that you learn to partner with because everybody has their strengths and weaknesses. And I think that the more we work with people who are different from us, the better it is. So with these live chart consults that we're doing on Instagram and Facebook, sometimes it's just about identifying those larger themes. Okay, we do have Neptune in Scorpio making a trine to the, again, loose trine to the ascendant in Pisces, which means that Neptune and Pluto are also making sextile. So just the idea of life being kind of confusing, especially for the first half of life, as Pluto matures, as Neptune matures in the chart. Just the idea that again, there's a difference between going with the flow and understanding when it's important to surrender to the lessons that the universe is giving you. You can't just be passive in this life experience. You can't just allow the universe to take you where it will. Like, you have to say yes to things, you have to say no to things, you have to exercise your preference, which is something your spouse will teach you with that 7th house Mercury in Virgo. So listen to that, understand that, but also know when to give up and to float down the river of life and to go with the current, and understand that, too much of that and you might get snagged on a log, and because you're not paddling, you just kind of sit there. But if you mix that blend, that ideal blend of surrender and action, you'll actually have a really great opportunity to navigate some of these deeper spiritual waters that you've signed up to experience in your life. Because the ascendant is ruled by that Jupiter in Libra, she's also got the Sun in Libra and Mars in Libra, all in the 8th house. There's going to be a theme throughout Corinne's life of death, but also taxes and estates. The idea of death surrounding Corinne, potential mediumship qualities, the ego getting involved with let's see, where is Venus? Venus is in the ninth house of travel, higher education. So specifically going to school for accounting, going to school for estates, law, going to school for business, even because the eighth house rules other people's money, and learning how to gain power and traction in the life through those eighth house topics. Definitely a possibility with Corinne's chart. I think especially because the sun in Libra is ruling Uranus in Leo in the sixth house of work. There is also a connection to the work environment with death and taxes and estates. The idea of walking into a situation where people are on the verge of transition, on the verge of passing specifically. That could be in a mortician's office or a morgue. That could be in a because the ninth house is also involved with Venus ruling the eighth house. That could also be somebody moving through an immigration office, yeah, and you working with the law, working with the estates, working with all of those eighth house topics, potential government influences, to help them transition into a new life. So that could be literal death topics in terms of the eighth house and working with the dead. Or it could be when it comes to estates and taxes and starting a new life over metaphorically and helping somebody end an old experience and move through again that legal, that estate, that accounting world into setting them up with a new outlook on life. Because Uranus is in the sixth house, business tends to be a little bit unpredictable. So it wouldn't surprise me if there were ups and downs, like the idea of things being seasonal, or just work being touch and go, always waiting for the next contract, not knowing when the next job is going to come your way. So that's a theme. That's a thing. That's a theme. Then we've got the moon in Sag up in the 10th house being ruled by good. See, this is what I love about astrology is the themes continue to repeat over and over and over. Yeah. So the ruler, Jupiter, of Corinne's chart is in the 8th house of death, taxes, and estates. The sun is also in that same house, which is ruling her 6th house of work. Jupiter is also ruling her 10th house of career. So just the idea that death, taxes, and estates are going to surround Corinne in multiple ways, shapes, and forms. And it's actually what she's going to become known for, is helping people navigate those really intense life situations that leave them potentially financially disheartened, without a feeling that they own their own life, and her able to navigate those situations with them to help them understand how the law works in their favor, especially because we've got Saturn in Sagittarius in the 10th house. That's a big, like, double law signification in the 10th house of career. And the moon is there as well. So she loves what she does. She really has an emotional connection to all of the people that she's able to help transition. And I think that's what's beautiful about Corinne's chart, is it keeps reinforcing, despite the unpredictability, it keeps reinforcing the same thing of working with people in that liminal space where they're not sure where their life is going to end up. And she swoops in with all of the knowledge and all of the kind of tactical skills that she's developed over time. And in some ways, that Pisces ascendant, that adaptability comes forward, and she's able to really take charge in that peacekeeping Libra role and help somebody navigate the ins and outs of a system that can be just absolutely overwhelming for somebody who's been emotionally compromised. Really great stuff, Corinne. I'm in love with your chart. I think that it's a super interesting balance of helping people, but also learning how to help yourself, understanding opposites, and working within, having the tools to work within both your personal chaos and the chaos of others. Great stuff. Great stuff. Okay, thank you so much, everybody. I appreciate. Hey, good morning, everybody. Thank you, thank you. We are about halfway through our charts. We're going to be doing 4 more. Thank you, everybody who's watching on Facebook and Instagram at the same time. If you'd like more information, ScorpioRisingAstrology.com for classes and consults. Let's move on to Brianna, Miss Brianna, who was born at 12:42 p.m. in Winter Haven. Let's take a peek, shall we? Let's take a peek. Ascendant at 15 degrees Sagittarius, which again, ooh, 2 charts in a row. I'm going to need to take a drink for this. 2 charts in a row, Jupiter in the 8th house ruling the ascendant. Crazy town. So again, exactly what I said in the last chart, Brianna's got a dose of that as well. Not to the degree, but pretty close. We've got Sagittarius ruling the ascendant, so Jupiter and Cancer in the 8th, creating that, again, connection to death, taxes, and estates. That's a big part of Brianna's personality, and just the idea of being touched by death at an early age, surrounded by the ideas of accounting, taxes, estates, and working within those realms, especially because Jupiter is also ruling her 4th house of family. Wouldn't surprise me if that is the family business or one of her parents worked in that space as well. Yes, Sun in Libra, Cazimi with the Mars and the Moon. Goodness, okay. This is going to be a lot to unpack. So we've got the sun which represents the ego in the 11th house of friends in Libra. Brianna is the peacekeeper in her relationships as well, specifically with friends. She's the friend that doesn't like any of her friends to fight. So whenever her friends start fighting, she's the first one to kind of step in between people, break up the situation. But here's the interesting thing about this. Normally, that's what we would say about a sun in Libra in the 11th. That's the textbook definition, if you will. However, we have Mars, who's in Cazimi with the sun. So basically, when a planet is in the heart of the sun, conjunct the sun, it highlights those characteristics of that planet and brings forward a lot of that planet's characteristics and kind of fuses those two prospects. Mars is not known for its softness. Mars is not known for its ease. Mars is not known for its peacekeeping qualities and prefers to instigate rather than actually keep the peace. So when we look at Brianna's Libra nature, because her sun and her moon are both in Libra in the 11th, and just that tendency to just make people feel like the connections between them are safe and secure, and she has that mediator type of energy. She also has this Mars side, which jumps forward and cuts the throat of anybody who deals any sort of injustice to those she cares about. It's fierce, it's unrelenting, it is 0 F's given. And when that line is crossed and when injustices are done, that Mars comes out with the full assault rifle capabilities of her emotional intelligence, and she completely hands it to the person that has created said injustice. So there is this martial theme to how she works in her friendship environments. So that's fun. So beware. She might seem soft, but she has this intense side behind it all. We've got Mercury in Virgo in the 10th, retrograde, but Mercury is still in the sign of its exaltation, which is lovely. Let's see what Mercury is ruling. The 7th house of Gemini. 7th Gemini, and then 10th house of career. That's interesting. With it would be interesting for me to talk to Brianna about career stuff, because Mercury and Gemini, or Mercury and Virgo rather, in the 10th talks about a career that involves writing, a career that involves contracts, a career that involves the nitty-gritty verbal dialogue between people and working out the finer details. Because that's ruling your Gemini 7th house, paired with your sun moon in Libra in the 11th, like, you could be a relationship counselor. You could work in divorce mediation. You could work in helping people understand both sides of relationship, helping a relationship heal, also helping a relationship separate because of that Mars. But working in the relationship space and working specifically in the contracts revolving relationships, I think that especially because your upbringing entailed that 8th house theme of estates and accounting and death, you were touched by that at an early age. And so I think you understand the value of what it means to separate civilly. I think you understand what it means to have a will in place so that the family isn't torn apart by the death of a loved one. I think you understand what it means to make sure that the children are safe in a relationship that is separating or going both ways, and that nobody feels neglected or that the life is not compromised for anybody involved. And I think if you were to turn that into a career, you would actually be very, very good at it, because there's so much mediation quality in your chart. You've got so much of the good stuff when it comes to helping people argue in a way that is actually productive. We do have Venus and Scorpio co-present, just 6 degrees away from Pluto and Scorpio in the 12th, ruling the 11th. Yeah, those friendship situations, they tend to get pretty toxic pretty fast. Not necessarily a fan of that. Work situations also tend to get pretty toxic, just because that's how they pan out. But again, all of the qualities that we talked about before uniquely equip you to sort through that venom that comes in at the last minute when nobody's expecting it. I think once you sort out the contracts and once you sort out the legal aspect of it, because you understand that side of the equation, I think once the paperwork is signed, then sitting down with people and working through the guts of it is also part of that unique quality that you share from your chart. Yeah, really good stuff. Thank you, Brianna. Thank you for sharing your experience via astrology with me. I think that your chart has a lot of really good potential to do some great things in the world, for sure, if you're able to acknowledge that role, that is. Brianna says, someone just told me yesterday that I should go into relationship counseling. Perfect. That's what we like. Astrology saying the truth. Thank you, Marie. Amazing as always. Absolutely lovely. We've got about 20 minutes on the live stream, so feel free to join us. Just going through 8 random charts. I'll be doing it. I've been doing it for the past 4 days. I've got 3 more days worth of charts. If you'd like to submit your own, please private message me your birth date, place, and exact birth time. Spell out the month and day for me, and make sure that the time is exact, and we will put you in the queue for these chart readings. We've got 3 more, so let's go through them. Let's go to Allie. Allie was born at 4 a.m. In... I can't even pronounce that place, Allie, but you know who you are. I know you're giggling as I say that. But Allie, cheers. So we've got ascendant at 26 degrees of Capricorn. We've got Saturn in Libra in its exaltation. In the 10th house, entrepreneurship tendencies right off the bat. Because the ascendant is ruled by Saturn, which does very well in business in the 10th house of business in its exaltation in Libra. It is retrograde. It is conjoined Jupiter in Libra retrograde. So there is and Pluto's there too. Ouch. Okay. So here's the thing about the mix of Allie's chart so far with entrepreneurship. So we've got multiple placements that are not ideal. We've got 3 planets that are all retrograde. Yeah. Then we've got Saturn there, which is technically a malefic planet. Saturn is actually doing very well because it's in its exaltation and it is in a place that it likes to be in the chart. But we also have Jupiter here, which is a planet of luck and abundance. And we have Pluto here, which is technically not a great planet for the first 50 years of life. Saturn and Pluto are both ripening planets. They really mature over time. And so the older Allie gets, the more she's going to realize how much of an entrepreneur she actually is and how much of business is in her blood. But early years, it was really tough because she would try to sell random stuff. She would try to hold down a job and it just wouldn't be for her because of power dynamics and not and getting in fights with bosses and not being able to respect authority because she was the authority. She has all of these authority markers in her chart that I think make her a really strong person professionally. And if she, as she gets older, if she steps into that power in a graceful Libran type way and doesn't compromise herself, I think she'll understand the power of that traction. Yeah, good stuff. We've got the moon and Leo in the eighth being ruled by Moon and Leo in the eighth being ruled by the sun and Pisces in the third. That's tough. That's so from a direct perspective, when I've seen this in other clients' charts, that's early death of a sibling or somebody who was taken away before their time, especially if it was like a cousin or somebody who was very, very close to you, kind of that cousin who wasn't a cousin type of thing. That's a rough placement, but it also means that Ali is uniquely qualified to teach, write, and communicate those third house topics about death, estates, and what it means to lose somebody, but also work through the process of losing somebody and potentially benefit from that loss. So that's a unique aspect, I think, of that placement is loss turning into gain, but only through the creative process of using your words and mentally hashing through what that loss is trying to teach you from an egoic perspective. We also have Venus and Pisces here in the third. So, what? Venus and Pisces in the third, the sign of its exaltation, ruling the fifth house of creativity, massive creative juice here. And Venus and Pisces being very spiritual. We've got a lot of just good juju in the writing as well as the creative department. We've got tons of good energy there. And Ali knows I know a little bit about her, so there's good creative synastry because she loves what she does, and she's very good at it. We've also got Mercury in Aquarius in the second, being ruled by Saturn in Libra in the 10th. So, I mean, it's another marker for entrepreneurship. The issue is, as the entrepreneurship matures, so will the house of finance. But South Node is there and Saturn is technically retrograde along with all the other planets. So finances aren't necessarily going to make sense for the first 30 years of life. When she hits 50, that's really when everything's going to culminate. 60 is going to be the max lesson mastery that Ali's going to get when it comes to entrepreneurship and finances. But those two houses are very connected in her chart. One of the ways that she's going to make money is through travel, because Mercury in her second house of money is ruling the ninth house of travel, foreigners, and higher learning. She could also teach, especially at a college level, and earn some quick cash that way. But what else do we see in this chart? Mars and Aries in the fourth. Again, we've talked about Mars and Aries having military themes in the family. Mars and Aries having that military touching in the family specifically is an interesting dynamic right off the bat, which is also ruling the 11th house of friends. So maybe that military upbringing could have brought some interesting friendships that have stayed true to this day, which have really helped shape her home environment and help her really feel at home wherever she goes, as opposed to kind of putting her roots down and really sinking into one space, having one space to call her own. It's just this idea that she's home wherever. And that's it. Unfortunately, on Instagram, I've got a timer that's going down, so it looks like the time is being forced to end on Instagram. I'm so sorry, but you can watch that recording as well. I'll put it in my story. We'll continue on Facebook, though, so join me there for the rest of the conversation. We've got North Node in the 8th house in Leo, ruled by that 3rd house sun. So I think part of Ali's mission in life is really to understand those 8th house topics of death, those 8th house topics of accounting, those 8th house topics of managing other people's estates and resources and using the power of other people's money to leverage her teaching, her writing, her speaking abilities, and that truly being a life goal that she works towards, as opposed to getting caught up in the hustle and bustle, literally the hustle of entrepreneurship, which she's great at and will continue to be great at, but might detract her from that greater life purpose of mastering the art and science of death, taxes, estates, and other people's money of the eighth. So that is that. Thank you, everybody. Gary, to answer your question, all you need to do is send in your birth date, place, and exact birth time to me via private message. Don't leave it in the comments. And I will add you to the queue. I'm about 3 days out with the queue. It's super long. And if you'd like to schedule a personal consult with me in the meantime privately so we can go over some of the deeper details, you can always reach out, sam@scorpiorisingastrology.com. Cool. Lovely. Let's go on to our next chart. We've got 2 more, and we're going to talk about Liz. We're going to talk about Liz. Liz was born 6:38 p.m. in Waycross. Waycross. Feeling thirsty today. Okay. So we've got the ascendant in Gemini. Ascendant in Gemini making an opposition to Uranus and Sagittarius in the 7th. Goodness. Y'all need to get your relationship dynamics straight. And I am not one to talk because my Venus in Taurus is opposing by sign my ascendant. So I get it. I think that's why I'm uniquely qualified to give you this message, is do not over-identify with your relationships. The people who you hold in your heart do not need to consume your entire being. That is not ideal for anyone. Relationships are a partnership. They are not an all-consuming black hole that you can throw all of your problems into and bury them underneath the rug. That is not healthy. So we just need to be aware that that's kind of the case for a lot of us listening, and that's a message that I guess I'm supposed to learn too. Check. We've also got Moon in Cancer. Absolutely lovely. Love a good Moon in Cancer in the 2nd house of finance, which is really, really good for finance. Also, North Node in the 2nd house of finance and wealth. So that's a great financial marker right off the bat. Mars in Capricorn is also opposing. Ooh, that's interesting. That's super interesting. Liz, you're interesting. We've got Mars in Capricorn in the 8th house of death and accounts and estates, which is being ruled by Saturn and Pluto conjunct at 27 degrees, almost exactly in the 5th house of children, creativity, and sexuality. To give you an extreme example of how this would work, because the house of children is connected with the house of death, we find that children passing at an early age potential, because we have referral patterns between the 2nd house and the 8th house. The idea that you would financially benefit from those deaths, like an insurance situation or an estate situation, would be part of that dynamic as well. But unfortunately, that's part of the makeup of the chart. One of the things that is fascinating to me about Liz's chart is she's got Venus and Scorpio in the 6th, ruling the Saturn-Pluto conjunction in the 5th. Her work may very well revolve around and be because of, oh Lord, goodness gracious, that Venus is also in Cazimi with the Sun. It's conjoining the Sun exactly. So there's a double dose of this Venus-Scorpio energy. I think because Liz has been exiled, has been betrayed by her grief, has been compromised by those 8th house subjects of death and estates, that she now has made it her personal mission to help people, especially children and parents, in that same situation by helping them navigate the situations that really took her by storm, and making that not just a life's mission, but her day-to-day work of how to help people create opportunity from the dark underbelly that the world can sometimes show us. And that really comes from a place of just really really sour life experience, which can then be transmuted into the poison is transmuted into medicine, basically, in Liz's chart. If she's able to use what she does for a living as a vehicle to help those who have been traumatized by the same things that she has been traumatized by, especially when it comes to parents, children, sexuality, that fifth house, and that eighth house of death, accounting, and estates, and other people's money. That whole theme, constantly weaving back and forth into itself, really puts the crux of Liz's chart in those houses. That is a stellium that she has in the sixth house, which is Jupiter, Venus, Sun, and Mercury, all in the sixth house with that Venus Sun conjunction. So heavily identifies with work. I would potentially call her a workaholic. I know that because I have these markers in my chart. Boo-hoo. But the idea that what she's experienced has shaped her so completely that who she is what she does. There is no separation from the work that she chooses to do and who she is as a person. Because she's got Jupiter here, she's naturally lucky at what she does. And this is all in the sixth house of work, health, and pets. So it wouldn't surprise me if she chose a career that is in the health professions. I know that she's an LMT based off of what her conversation and her the conversations that we've had, but just the idea that the specific brand of Scorpio-like underworld that she's experienced has and needs to blend into her work in a very specific way, working with, again, creativity, sexuality, children, and death, taxes, estates. That's where the chart really has its crux, and that will help to master the art of finance and wealth if we're able to tackle those underlying themes. And that's really it. I mean, that's the big chunk of Liz's chart, because everything is packed into those houses. So thank you for sharing that, Liz. I appreciate it. And now we will go to our last chart, very last chart. We're going to go to Josh. Josh, who was born at 5:14 p.m. in Cleveland. We've got a 0 degree ascendant, super close ascendant. Ruled by Saturn retrograde in the 12th. So automatically, when we see the sun in the 12th or the ruler of the ascendant in the 12th, we know that the self is compromised. We know that the personality is lacking that confidence. We know that we need to work with self, so that we need to work with boosting the self in a way that is constructive, as opposed to surrounding ourselves, but also working with the internal chatter that might be tearing us down, because there's a natural affinity for going towards that victim mentality when we need to actually be building ourselves back up. So working with because Aquarius is on the ascendant, working specifically with the media, that is consumed auditorily, because Aquarius rules the peripheral nervous system. Surrounding yourself with media that is positive, Josh, podcasts, YouTube videos, audiobooks, things that are literally going to reorient your nervous system in a more productive way. I think that that's one of the ways that we remediate that. That's certainly how I remediate that, because I've got some not okay qualities in my chart too. We do have the sun at 22 degrees in the 8th house, accompanied by Venus and Mercury as well. Mercury is in Virgo, retrograde, but still in Virgo in the 8th. Again, 8th house topics today. Death, taxes, estates, working with money, creatively working with money. That might be fun. Specifically working with stocks, working with bonds, working with being your own boss, working with not necessarily entrepreneurship, but creatively working with money in a way that is fun for you and enjoyable with you, and allows you to reclaim that sense of power over external circumstances that you seem to have lost with that ruler of the ascendant in the 12th. So I think reclaiming financial power is one of the ways to remediate the ego, is a good way to think about it. We do have the sun ruling the moon in Leo in the 7th. So we've got the self again over identifying with relationships. The moon in Leo is also by sign opposing the ascendant. But what's interesting is you've already learned how to navigate relationships. The South Node being in the 7th house, as well as Jupiter and Leo in the 7th house, relationships are one of those things that you don't necessarily need to master in this lifetime, but instead it's very much about the North Node in the 1st house, 5 degrees, 6 degrees away from the ascendant, talking about how important you are to you, and not necessarily focusing on what others think, what others feel, working on your own stuff and not really meddling in the affairs of mortals, so to say. And I think that that's a life lesson that a lot of us need to understand, especially for those of us who have the ruler of the ascendant or the sun in a compromised place, where who we are shouldn't be defined by our relationships. It shouldn't be defined by other people. It shouldn't be defined by our work. It shouldn't be defined by our finances. It shouldn't be defined by all the other parts of our charts, our friends, our health. You know, who we are is more. It is all of that, but it is more than those individual topics. And I think that that's a great kind of unifying lesson for all of us to work on. But if we were to look at something that Josh would actually be known for over the long haul, it would actually be working with death creatively. And the reason why I'm saying that is because we've got Mercury and Virgo in the 8th of death, accounting estates, which is ruling Mars in Gemini in the 5th of creativity, sexuality, children. And then Mars is ruling Pluto and Scorpio in the MC up in the 10th of success, career. So I think putting those all together, we might find a really unique synastry about taking the topics that financially especially are difficult for people, that create a lot of mental struggle, and you helping people in the savant way that you kind of work creatively navigate those troubles and help people understand what it's like to come out the other side. So yeah, that's a really interesting note about Josh's chart. But when it comes to just overall themes, I think working on self-esteem, very important. Working on personal power, very important, and making sure you understand the value that you bring to the table, because there is a lot of it, especially with Sun, Venus, and Mercury all in Virgo in the 8th. It's going to be value that nobody really understands at first, that they don't really appreciate at first, or might not be able to see. But the technical value that you bring to a support team is major, with 3 planets in Virgo in the 8th. Those are skills that are only given to certain people, and you are that specific tool that can only do these like 3 jobs that nobody else can do because they just don't have that tool. And that's part of your unique dynamic, is that specificity becomes your skill. But if we let the ego trip of not being good enough for the majority stand in your way, then you're not going to be able to tap into and access your specialty and your power. Cool. So that is the last chart. Liz in the chat lost her first child, daughter 15 months gestation. Many clients come to her as an LMT, and it's killing her not to be able to do that work right now. Absolutely excellent. Thank you so much for that validation, Liz. I appreciate everybody jumping onto the chat. We're just over an hour. If you would like to be a part of this daily astro chart, Astro-Babble that we're doing, please feel free to submit your birth date, place, and exact birth time. Spell out the month and the day for me, so that we can make sure that that's accurate. And if you would like to schedule a private consult, if you would like to take a class from me, if you just like to talk or learn astrology, you can always hit me up, sam@scorpiorisingastrology.com, or just scorpiorisingastrology.com, and take a look at my daily forecast that I do on Facebook and Instagram. I'll try to do Instagram. To answer your question, Rachel, how do we know if you read the chart that you submitted? I have everybody in a queue. The queue right now is about 3 days long. because I do 8 charts a day, or have been doing 8 charts a day. So I have all of you in queue. And if you would submit your information, I'll add you to that queue. And then I private message everybody the morning of. So I let you know, hey, your chart's being read on this day. At this time, your number XYZ in queue, and that's how we kind of do it. But if you would like to catch up on previous live streams as well, I put those all on the YouTube channel, which I'll put a link to in the comments for this video as well, which is just, again, Scorpio Rising Astrology. But that is it for our live stream today. Thank you so much for tuning on. I'm very much enjoying our little chats and the chart work. Feel free to submit your charts. And as always, may the stars be ever in your favor.